Hi, for those of you new here, this is evolution simulation game The Sapling, my solo indie game project. It's a game where you can basically do two types of things. On the one hand, there are a number of scenarios tasking you to design an ecosystem that meets specific requirements. On the other, there's a sandbox where you can build your own plants and animals, turn on random mutations and see how they evolve. In this series, consisting of 6 videos, I showcase the development and content for the third big update for the game. Building the sapling takes so much of my free time that I rarely play video games anymore, but I do make exceptions for video games that are somehow related to the game. Let's call it market research. So, during the latest playthrough of Spore, I noticed that the creatures feel so much more alive, and I couldn't wrap my head around why exactly. It was only when I closed my eyes for a moment that I realized what it was. Sound. In Spore, all creatures make all kinds of noises, and for some reason this subconsciously tells you that the thing you see on screen is real. But how should I design a sound for a player-created creature? A creature that I, per definition, know nothing about. Until now, the answer to that question was so far away from me that I postponed even trying to figure it out. But this realization about Spore forced me to make a start. My first attempt was to try to see if the sounds could be procedurally generated, just like so many other things in the game. I kind of expected a whole body of research here, with algorithms that take as input information like creature size, creature emotion, mouth shape and things like that, and then output the best fitting sound, but I could barely find anything. This means I have no choice but to follow Spore's lead and have a finite number of sound collections instead, which can be linked to each mouth in the game. But then still, say I want to create a sound for this mouth, where do I start? Fortunately, this is a question more people have had to answer in the past, because movies and games are full of fantasy creatures and monsters. Apparently, what professionals do, for example when creating the sound of some video game monster, is take ingredient sounds from huge expensive sound libraries and then put layer over layer over layer and pitch match them to make it sound like one impressive roar. My goal was to have a few idle sounds that the player hears when the camera is close to a creature, and a few call sounds for when the creature does the cry action. I spent countless hours listening, re-listening, comparing and finally selecting samples. I started with well-known animals like dogs, cows and donkeys, but these were too recognizable. Once I started going through collections of bird sounds, most of them from species not that well known, the chances of finding something usable increased dramatically. As an example, the nectar beak takes many of its chirping sounds from the yellow-billed kites. Surprisingly though, over half of the animal sounds I picked in the end were not created by animals at all, but by the human mouth or by doing something weird like using a vuvuzela to blow into jelly. I linked the vuvuzela to this mouth. Here's how that sounds. My original aim was to have a separate sound pack for each mouth, but that resulted in lots of relatively small sound packs. In practice, this meant that, while playing, the same sounds were repeating over and over, which was really noticeable. To fix this, I decided to merge a few sound packs. This means multiple mouths can be using the same sound pack, but because there is now more variation within that pack, it's a lot less noticeable. Another trick to increase variation is that the game randomly varies the pitch during playback. So even if you hear the same sound 3 times in a row, it might be at different pitches, tricking your mind into believing that it's just the same animal crying again, instead of playing back the exact same recording 3 times. Implementing this sound system was one of the first things I worked on for the new update, but then I got distracted with implementing the new nest system. Obviously, I developed with all sounds muted to prevent myself going crazy listening to the same music every day, and I totally forgot I added this. A few weeks later, I did turn on the sound for something else while I was debugging nests in trees. And suddenly I heard other animals calling in the distance. It was truly a goosebumps moment. I personally love to move the camera really low in an area with lots of creatures, put headphones on, and really hear their noises all around me. To give the player a bit of an impression of how each mouth sounds, you also get to hear the sound while clicking a mouth. The editor music is a bit dreamy with lots of reverb, so to make the sounds fit in the mix, I've given them lots of reverb here as well. You can hear how ridiculous it is when I turn off the background music. Speaking about sounds in the editor, I also took this opportunity to further add more of the little sound effects you hear, increasing the game's juiciness. For example, when hovering a body part, you now hear, and when you add a body part, you hear, and when you remove one, you hear. It required lots of tweaking volume and pitch to get nice subtle UI sounds that don't sound like a machine gun in this context. And besides the animal editor, there was also a whole new editor that needed sound. What is the sound of space? In movies, I've noticed you either get a really big orchestral heroic sound with lots of brass to convey the grandness of space, but more often it is really quiet, mimicking how there is no sound in space. I decided to do a bit of both. The quiet part is an ambient drone, and then later in the mix I add a French horn playing variations of the main theme. I felt these ambient sounds fit the game so well that I started looking for other places that I could use them, and discovered a really obvious one: water. I quickly got the sound I wanted to use, but implementing was harder than I expected. You see, most of the audio sources in the game are on one location. I mean, the audio source might move, but still the sound is coming from that one moving audio source. In the Unity game engine, to get this to work, I can just add an audio source and the engine will do the rest. Water, on the other hand, is not in one place but can be all around you. After some experimentation, I got this working by calculating the distance to water for 20,000 anchor points in the world. The camera checks the distance of the closest anchor point and increases the volume of the water sound effect if the water is close and vice versa. The result of all of this is a game with a much more varied palette of sounds in the background, and something that sounds a lot less like an experiment on a computer and a lot more like a moving, living, breathing world. It's really calming to create a simple ecosystem, put the camera near the water and just listen to the mix of water sounds, randomly generated music and animals in the distance. Reminds me a bit of these ambience videos that are popular on YouTube these days. And if you bought the game on Steam or itch, within a few weeks you can listen to all this too.